Traditional healers believe they have a greater role to play in the fight against COVID-19, but how willing is the government to work with them regarding those South Africans who only believe in traditional medicines? This was the subject of a recent discussion at the University of KwaZulu-Natal in a webinar which looked at the vaccine rollout strategy and the role of traditional medicine. UKZN's Professor Nceba, Gqaleni, in fact, was part of that discussion, and he joins us now via Zoom to talk more about it. Prof, a very good afternoon to you. Grateful for your time today. So what was the consensus at that webinar?
Firstly, the traditional healers welcome the program on vaccination because it is in line with their philosophy of prevention of disease. But they are grudgingly welcoming it because they consider that at the beginning of the lockdown in this situation, they were never considered much. Then they think government might have a motive of using them now to lure the public to embrace vaccination. So it's a welcome but grudging development.
So how do they mend the relationship then? Because there seems to be, as you highlight there, a lack of trust or a trust deficit.
It's not from the traditional healers. They've always been willing to cooperate. It's largely been on the government side. You know, the lack of consultation, the lack of co-design, and also just to explain the science behind vaccines, because traditional healers says, we're not scientists. We don't know this thing. And you want us then to mobilize communities on what we don't fully appreciate ourselves. And that's part of this consultation that needs to happen. And that's really the crux of it. But they're equally asking, why don't you ask us? Because you don't have any cure for COVID. For 2 years now, you've known that there's no cure for COVID. Why never invest in our traditional medicine and fast track the research and development of our products?
It's interesting that you mentioned the issue of turning to traditional medicine, perhaps not even for just a cure, but for treatment, because I recall last year during level 1 lockdown, there was a lot of talk about Artemisia as something that people should take, even though it doesn't cure, it assists. Some were saying that story sort of evaporated, if you will. At the beginning of this year, there was a company owned by traditional leaders, I believe, that said they had a remedy, a mixture that would help reduce, in some cases, severe illness, or treat you, in fact, over a shorter course of time. Why don't we see those things followed through to the end?
Of course, research is a slow process, and traditional healers are patient in understanding that. What they wanted to hear much more directly from government to say, look, we are looking for solutions from you. Come forward, let's see how our research institutions can support that. That came late, and at the moment things that are happening are very much sporadic, if you want to use. They don't look to be well coordinated, and the communication doesn't get to the healers themselves, such that everyone understands what role they are playing at the moment.
How do the healers feel about their remedies, their medicines being tested and perhaps approved by a body such as SAPRA, for example, which we know is currently dealing with approval of the vaccines?
No, they welcome that. They welcome that. Look, there are two things here. There is the role of a healer-patient relationship, which is regulated by the Traditional Health Practitioners Council. But if you have a medicine that's going to be rolled out and possibly used by doctors in hospital, clearly it does need to go through formal processes of research and development such that even doctors can have confidence. Because if you don't research, you never know, is this medicine just for dealing with symptoms? Is this medicine just for prevention? Or is it really to help someone who's developed severe illness? And you establish those through research. And so it's important. So you can't just take anything and say to a doctor with someone who is on a ventilator needing oxygen and seriously ill and give them something that doctors don't know. And so that would be a risk for that to happen.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but what I'm hearing you say is that the relationship, treatment relationship between traditional healers and their clients is still pretty much a very micro one, and that's where it's likely to remain, where it's between, let's say, if I'm a healer and you're coming to me and need help, that's where it'll likely stay, versus the mass setup of a hospital, precisely because of the engineering of the two, the West and the indigenous.
That is correct. Just like you find products in pharmacies, and within a pharmacy, that is within the domain of the Pharmacy Council. But the thing is, for healers, it's not a question of that they want only themselves to dispense or prescribe. If they have a help that can help in the pandemic, whether it's from a pharmacy or through a medical doctor, they want to make that available. It needs to be researched, and they just want to be considered and recognized that they have something that may be valuable. But if they're not even considered as part of possible solution, when there is no solution, then is not acceptable.
Prof, thank you so much for speaking to us. That was Professor Nceba Gqaleni, a lecturer at the University of KwaZulu-Natal, speaking to us about traditional healers' contribution in the fight against COVID-19 on the back of a webinar that was held recently, hosted by the university.